Hello and welcome to the Tuesday, January 23rd meeting of the Air Planning Board. I have a paragraph I'm obligated to read as this is a hybrid Zoom live meeting. This meeting hearing of the Air Planning Board will be held in person at the location provided on this notice. Members of the public are welcome to attend this in-person meeting. Please note that while an option for remote attendance and/or participation via Zoom is being provided as a courtesy to the public, the meeting hearing will not be suspended or terminated if technological problems interrupt the virtual broadcast unless otherwise required by law. Members of the public with particular interest in a specific item on this agenda should make plans for in-person versus virtual attendance accordingly. This meeting will be live on Zoom. The public may access the proceedings by joining Zoom, meeting ID number 833-6548-0732, or by calling 929-205-6099. For additional information about remote participation, please contact Danny Ruiz, Town Planner, at druiz@air.ma.us or 978-772-8220, extension 144 prior to this meeting. First, the item of business is to approve the agenda, and I would like to make a motion with an amendment. I'd like to move the minute approval up to do that first, and then we're free to do the table of uses, and we don't have to worry about what, we can just let it ride. So, do I have a second to that?
Second.
Any further discussion?
No.
Hearing none. Ken Diskin, how do you vote?
Aye.
Nathan King?
Aye.
Julie?
Yes.
Jeff?
Jeff Tillotson, aye. Good evening, all.
Good evening. And I vote aye. It's unanimous. So regarding the minutes of January 9th, I'm hoping everyone saw my edits. There were just two. I needed to add a space and change the word insured to assured, and that's it. We have a motion for the approval of the January 9th, 2024 minutes.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Jeff Tillotson, second.
All right.
Oh.
Any discussion? Hearing none. Ken?
Aye.
Nathan?
Aye.
Julie?
Yes.
Jeff?
Jeff Tillotson, aye.
And Jonathan says aye, so approved. Now we're going to talk about the table of uses, and there are two reasons we're doing this. The first reason, as I suggested last week, was that it's just an opportunity for the planning board to make sure that we're on the same page and we understand the table uses inside out, and just as a check for us. But there's actually another level that's even more significant, in that there is a working group made up of a number of boards in town that is reviewing the zoning regulations and bylaws, in particular table of use, to see if we can arrive at a place where Air is better prepared to provide a greater variety of housing to meet our needs now and in the future. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn this over to Ken. And Ken is going to lead us through the table of uses discussion because he's extremely familiar with it. Ken, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just as a way to review for all of us, we were kind enough to receive copies at our table. Jeff, I'm not sure if you and Julie have the table use available for yourself there or not. You do?
Yeah.
Okay. So just just for the board and for the public, the table of use regulations consists of, I would think, somewhere in the vicinity of 8 different pages, and it's broken down to sections of the types of uses in the town. So in a general way, residential uses, commercial uses, public and institutional uses, and so on down the line. But the more important thing is that this table of use has the first column that goes across the page at the top indicates the zoning districts in town. And the way it works is the horizontal zoning districts go every single page in the same spot, and then below those, on the vertical, what's permitted in those districts, what's prohibited or no in the districts, what might need a special permit by a board, either a planning board, a zoning board, or even the Board of Selectmen. There's some very small issues there for the Board of Selectmen. And the purpose of this is to basically codify in a table against the actual, what used to occur in the past was there was actual verbiage, a language in the zoning bylaws. So the language of each of these pieces used to exist in old zoning bylaws. So it's kind of been thought by consultants, by others, that to just put it in a table like this it's a quicker reference. It pretty much tells you what applies at each district. And then if you're required to go before a board, whether it's a planning board or just go straight to the building department with a permit, you know what the steps are that are going to be required depending on the zoning district that you're in. So for this particular meeting, that's kind of a summary of the entire table of uses and how it lines up, just as it lays out in the zoning, which is basically section 5.2, and it refers back to section 5, which is the text of the table and basically the use regulations. So for this purpose, for this board established in the past, we set up some goals about looking at where we may make some changes in the residential districts.
Excuse me. Before you go further, Ken,
Yep.
can I ask that we talk about what all these rubrics mean and what the letters mean? And what
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And
Yep.
so we could take, do you want to take turns doing that? So,
No, I can do it.
Okay.
It's all right. So when we look at the first page of the table and we look at the top of the table, it goes across to the right and it's highlighted. Those are the different zoning districts in town. So if we start from the left, A1. So A1 in our town, we consider that to be a residential district with the largest lots. So those lots have a minimum size of 40,000 square feet. Now, what I should mention is that there's also another appendix in the zoning which gives you these dimensions. So the dimensions are not shown in this table. So to do the right kind of research, you have to use the use regulations and the table of dimensional regulations, the second table. We happen to know it because we've done a lot of work in these different districts. So A1 is the largest residential district in town and tends to be the furthest from the downtown area. It tends to be the most, if you want to call it most rural, or the largest lots in town are in A1. So as an example, it typically is somewhat north of the power company easement that runs across town, like through Washington Street and over through, actually over to the proposed Stratton Hill development and areas like that. So it kind of crosses town to the north. A2 is a zone that was set up, again, in the past to be a little bit closer to town, and that has a minimum lot size of 12,000 square feet. So there is quite a big difference between the two residential zoning districts that are known as A1 and A2. The third district that's a residential district across the top of the page is general residence, GR it's known as. That district tends to be closer to town, and many of the areas that are closer to town, meaning downtown, and general residence, that has a minimum residential lot size of only 10,000 square feet. So those are the three general residence type, not general residence, but residential zones. One of them is known as general residence that we talk about. The next two line items that we have, and the next two categories at the top, are the Downtown Ayer Form-Based Code District and the West Ayer Village Form-Based Code District. Those two districts came into play in the last, I think, 5 or 6 years. One around 18 and the other one around maybe 2021, somewhere in that vicinity.
and if you don't mind if I leap in.
Go ahead.
So the downtown one covers, if you're coming in from the east, from the bridge down to the corner where it meets Park Street and then just turns a bit to capture the space where Santander is today. And so that's our downtown. The West Village one is West Main Street, and that's the area that begins with the other bridge that crosses the train tracks going from in the westerly direction. And that's the more recent of the two.
Typically now, those two districts are encouraging the densest type of residential development and allow by right many residential uses, something like apartment buildings and apartments over commercial space and things along those lines, which still may need other board approvals, but they typically are easier to build and are encouraged to be built in the downtown and the West Ayer Village Form-Based Code District. The next district is probably the...
Excuse me for interrupting.
Please.
Mr. Chair and Ken, how formal does that sound?
Yeah.
I can't write in the chat, and I'm just going to assume for people on Zoom, I don't know if I'm allowed to screen share, but I have the web version of our table of use up. Can I attempt to screen share, or is that not the right process for our evening?
I think it's a good idea.
I think it's a good idea if you can. And while you're doing that, I want to acknowledge that Pauline has raised her hand.
And yes, Mr. Chair, for the exact same point that Julie just made, I was wondering if you could screen share what Ken is talking about. I know what you're talking about. I'm familiar with it, but the general public who may see this later isn't. And it would be awesome if you could screen share, and that is my only concern. Thank you for asking.
Indeed, Pauline. Please understand we're down 2 critical people this evening, so we're a little bit technologically challenged. But
No, I do. But thank you, Julie, for bringing that up.
I could read your hand, Polly, in a good way. The only thing I'll ask, and we won't spend more than a minute on this, Jonathan, is anyone there able to just either give me co-host privileges? Because I'm not able to screen share or chat.
Right.
I turned on screen share. Hold on.
Oh, hi, Sam.
Hi. I turned on
Yes, you
screen.
can do it now.
Yeah, I turned on screen share, so you should
Okay.
be able to.
Yeah, I think you'll see my kids' piano books too, but we'll be okay.
She got an electronic version, or she's going to screen
It'll
share?
make more sense than they look at it.
Ah, there we go. There it is.
Okay, so this, what Julie was kind enough to put up, is the very first page of the table use, which we're talking about, and we're talking about that column that's highlighted at the top as we go across from A1 to the hospital district, which is off to the right, HS. So we're now talking, we're in review, we're over to MUT. The MUT district is probably the least known district in town, and that is a very limited district that goes down Central Ave. And it's basically a mixed-use transitional, I believe is the actual language that's used for that district, MUT. So that district is encouraging even smaller, more density on that street in an attempt, again, to try to make some improvements to the street. Some of them have been built, others may come in the future. So that's got some special rules and regulations about it for dimensional sizes and whatnot, but again, it's a kind of a special district in town, very small district. The next district, which now will get us into the commercial and industrial districts, general business, which again tends to be more condensed in the downtown area, or kind of think of it as from the Rotary on one side towards the entrance to Devon's, kind of going down to where Shop and Save is on the other side of town, roughly. But again, mostly on the main streets, mostly encouraging the development of new businesses in the area. Then we have the two industrial zones. One is known as light industrial, and the other is known as industrial. The difference between the two is basically the size of the developments that end up being on that land. Light industrial tending to be on smaller lots and smaller businesses. Industrial would be a big example of, out off of Westford Road and in those areas where we have big industries, the Pepsi and things along those lines. Mm-hmm. The final district that we have along the heading is the hospital HSC, but it's a hospital district. I'm not rattling off the exact name right now, but it's basically the hospital, where the hospital is located.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, I've lost the audio.
Lost the audio.
Is it still out?
I'm fine.
Okay.
Okay.
Might have been at my end, thank you.
So that's the HCS at the far right, the healthcare, which basically means the hospital.
Healthcare services, I guess that's the appropriate title. And it's basically the hospital end. So it's very exclusive to the land at the hospital and around the hospital and the adjacent rehab center and whatnot that's up there. So in a general way, that's the listing across the top of the table. And then below that, in each column, and looking at the column on the left where it starts out by saying class of use. As you can see up there, the residential use happens to be on page 1 in our particular zoning, and this varies from town to town. And then it continues on for several pages as it gets into different classes of use. So that's in a general way what we have for discussion on that. I'd like to stop if anyone has a question at this point in time about the layout or anything else. No?
Well, I was going to explain what the letters P, N, SPB, SPZ were all about.
Okay, go ahead.
So very simply, if we were to take this and think of it as a grid, for example, suppose I wanted to say, gee, I wonder if I could build a townhouse in the general business district. So if I drop down general business, I go down 3 rows and I look across, there it is, and I get the letters SPZ. So what that means is a townhouse or a multifamily dwelling it could be built in the general business district upon the special permit approval of the ZBA, which is, what does it stand for? The zoning board?
Of appeals.
Of appeals, thank you, of appeals. So when you see P in the box, that means it's permitted by right. So detached single-family dwelling in A1, A2, general residence, et cetera, that's a P, means it can be built by right. Now, when you get to the West Air Village, you'll notice that suddenly it says SPB. So it's possible, but you would need a special permit from this board. Who are we? So from this board. And the final letter, then we have two other letter sets. We have the N, which simply means no. And then again, I think I said SPZ would be for the Board of Appeals, SPB would be us. And then N is no, and P means permitted, no special permit or variance required.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
It's Jeff Tillotson speaking. I do appreciate you going through the letters, and if you don't mind,
There's a couple more.
if I could just phrase that a little bit differently. P is permitted. SPZ or SPB is permitted with special permit
Permitted with special
given
permit.
by either the zoning board or the planning board. But it is a permitted use with a special permit. In
Yep,
other words, it is not a no, you can't do it. You have
Correct.
to apply. It is an accepted use in that area. P, and then N would be not allowed, not permitted in that area, and there's no other way to get there.
no.
So it's just, it's very different. If you think about it as no without a special permit, that's actually not what it says. It is permitted with a special permit.
Correct.
I just want to make that clear difference, if you don't mind.
That's
Thank
fair
you.
enough. Well spoken. Thank you.
Okay, so, thank you, Jeff, for that. There happens to be a couple of other small categories, too. There's a special permit by selectmen, but that is a very tiny use. That may be for like removing soils from town or something like that.
Yeah, I see it under
It's-
extensive uses. For instance, golf courses, commercial removal of sod, as you just indicated.
Yeah, it's a very tiny exception there that they get involved. Most of the work on these pages is going to be done by the planning board, and that's why we're talking about it, in essence. So with that in mind, does anybody else have any questions so far that we should cover, or statements or concerns?
If I may, Ken?
Yep.
I also think it's important that we talk about this. Yes, we work with commercial. Yes, we work with light industrial and industrial. But I think the focus of this evening's meeting is to talk about housing.
Yes, it is.
Housing.
It is.
That's exactly the purpose. We're not going to go
Okay,
through
great.
all of it. We want to focus on residential, and I'm going to turn to Ken to give us the housing context for this discussion.
Okay, thank you, Jeff, for reminding us of that. So what's been going on in the last few months as a goal for the planning board and as a goal for a working group that was set up by the affordable housing folks was to look at the zoning with a thought that we could potentially create a couple of more avenues to get to the affordable housing that I believe most of us are in behind that we would like to create. Where do we look at this table? Where do we look at the uses and the difficulty of getting some approvals, potentially, and streamline it a little bit? Now, there's no guarantee we're going to get the result that we're looking for, but we're trying to look where we think that we can get a little more streamlined approach and maybe some more approvals for affordable housing units. Part of that is driven by the fact that we have an inclusionary housing zoning section as well. But that only comes into effect when we do at least 5 units, so in a townhouse or multifamily format. So we don't have the option of stressing inclusionary housing to applicants unless they're doing, more than 5 units. And then there's a whole system for us getting the 6th unit as affordable and some other bonuses. There's a formula. There's another whole concept in here that if we get more diversity in town based on the training that we've got from the affordable housing folks and whatnot, that if we get a more diverse housing component and a more diverse housing makeup, we're apt to get a better price point along the way. They may not be purely affordable, but they may develop a diversity of look in the town, which is similar to what we already have.
Yeah, I'd like to underline that, if you would, if you excuse me, Ken. So it's not, yes, affordable housing, capital A, is important, but it's not just that. It's to encourage a variety of tiers of housing. Because one of the things that we've heard over and over again when I talk to people in Ayer, they don't want to see this become a gentrified town. And the best thing we can do to keep the town's character is to ensure that there's a variety of housing options at multiple levels, so it's not just the exclusive, most expensive option, the single family, that there are other options here that are livable. Some of them will be officially affordable, but many of them won't. Many of them will simply be housing, maybe starter housing, for example, whatever the size of a family or if it's an individual, et cetera. But it's being sure that we have a zoning structure that's appropriate for what people need. And as I think all of us are aware, we do have a housing crisis in the United States and Massachusetts in particular. And if you saw the Boston Globe series, Spotlight series on the housing crisis, you would completely understand why an exercise like this is significant at this time.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Again, so in this instance, similar to what we're focusing on in residential housing, when we use the word diversity, what we're actually saying is units that are priced across a whole spectrum, a whole financial spectrum.
Correct.
They're approachable by not just, exactly, that's all I'm going to say, just they come in at price points that offer opportunities to people of different financial standing.
Right. Exactly.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Jeff,
It's just easy. We say diversity, and it's very easy.
I know.
In today's language, that's easy. So again, that's the narrow focus of what we're talking about.
Correct.
Thank you.
yeah, and to the chair, to Jeff, so there's no guarantee that when we try to develop these different housing approaches that we're gonna land to the right answer, but the training tells us that if we do that over a period of years and long term, we may get the result that we're looking for, that more widespread price point, rather than everything going out at $800,000 a unit in a single family home, so.
Absolutely agreed. And as we know, Mr. Diskin, we've seen zoning change how many times in our short time on this planet? Zoning does change continuously. And I don't think the pressures that we're seeing now were even contemplated 25 years ago in this area, to be honest with you.
Right. Okay, so in this case, you want me to move on to
Please
the
do.
other part of this equation that's going to happen is that the subgroup coming from the affordable housing side is going to come before this board in the next few weeks, giving the results of what their discussions have been about. So I'm trying to emphasize tonight, with the permission of the chairman and others on the board, that we get this little update in our education, because when they come forward, they're going to highlight just a few areas, and I'm going to cover those areas now in a minute here, in the residential side. So just to remind, as Jeff pointed out, we're talking about an affordable housing concept that we hope will add to more housing types in town that potentially could, change the look of all just single-family subdivisions or single-family homes in town, give us some more to look. So what I did before the meeting is, I wasn't sure who was going to be here and wasn't. So I took the zoning table and I highlighted the areas that are being talked about by the subgroup, and it's going to be hard to put it up on the board.
But at least we could tell everyone what they are, and then
We can tell
at
you what
home,
they
they
are.
can circle them.
Right.
Right?
So if you don't mind doing that, Julie and Jeff and the public or whatever. So what I've highlighted here is under column A1 is the category where it says two-family dwelling. We'll talk about that, and we'll talk about it in A2, two-family dwelling. And we'll talk about...
And the intersection is SPZ for those, correct?
Correct. So where it says, we're going to talk about where it says SPZ in class of use 1.2 and class of use A1 and A2. Then right below that, where it says townhouse and multifamily, we're going to talk about that where it has an N right now. Across that line, if you go to general business where it says SPZ, highlight that. We'll talk about that. And then the next two are very simple. So,
You got this one as well, right?
yeah, those four together.
Those four. Yep.
And downtown Ayer, which is kind of fascinating, at the very bottom, there's a 1.7.
Oh.
Might have to go up just a fraction.
Julie, if you could just scroll, move that up a little bit.
And for some reason, there's a difference between...
Okay. I was trying to figure out if I could highlight it. I might be able to after this.
If you could do that, it would be awesome, yeah. So that where it says SPB, we'll talk about that. And then to the left, in the actual text, 1.6, thank you, Julie, that's awesome. 1.6, we'll talk about the word apartments. And then in 1.7, we'll talk about the word dwelling unit. And that would be enough for tonight. Basically, those are the key categories that have been highlighted by the group that's been working on this, the subgroup.
Hey, Ken?
Yes.
Excuse me, Mr. Chair, through you.
Oh.
Would it be helpful at this point to say who's been working on the special, on the group? I think we all know, but I don't think the general population would know.
It's been, Charlie Schultz has been a member. Janet Provadakis from the Affordable Housing. There were two for Affordable Housing, Dave Cybor, Alicia Hersey from Town Hall, myself, and Nathan King from the Planning
Nathan,
Board.
yeah, thank you.
And I think there might have been one other from the general public, but I'm missing it, I'm sorry, at the moment.
And is Danny part of that?
Danny Ruiz, excuse me, of course, yes. Danny Ruiz and
Okay,
Charlie,
great.
we're both part of it.
So we've got Danny, Alicia, and Charlie, and then 3 citizens, 2 from the planning board.
Two-
And two, and I'm sorry, 4 citizens, 2 from the planning board and 2
From
from
Affordable Housing, correct.
Yep, thank you.
Okay, so those highlighted areas, are the areas that I would consider to be the hot spots, if that was the term to use. So
Yeah, it makes sense.
the idea was for this board to start discussing how we would potentially make those changes to this zoning table, and we'll get recommendations from that subgroup. But I thought it might be good for us to look at it first and talk about it. So there recently has been some proposals that have come up for 2 families that have not been given the majority that they need to get approved, so we may as well start right with the 2 families. So we are a little bit handicapped tonight because we don't have Danny with us.
Right.
So that's clearly a little bit of a handicap. But research has been done, and I did a little on my own. And other towns do have this as an allowed use in these districts, similar districts to us. They do have regulations for it. They don't just typically put it in fully permitted. They do have some regulations.
Right.
Maybe in the style or the look, you know. So that's something I guess we want to talk about is, do we think that 2 families should be more easily permitted? Maybe we go to a special permit by the planning board rather than a special permit by the zoning board? Or do we go all the way to a P, which just allows it?
So
That's just,
if I may.
that's a start.
Now, if I may, and just again, clarification, I know we're gonna talk about apartments and dwelling units later. 2-family dwellings. I come from a neighborhood where 2 families were side by sides, often referred to as duplexes,
Yep,
and 2 families were up downs,
right,
often referred to as Philadelphias. They're not really, but that's what we call them.
yep,
And so, if they become allowed uses, they still have the same dimensional setbacks, height, all that stuff that exists in that zoning area.
Correct.
Okay, so if it's 25,000 square feet and you need to have 12, I'm not going to quote the numbers that are currently in our bylaw, but you know, I think is it A2,
It's 12,000 for a single family,
plus an additional 10 for the next unit.
and it's 24,000 for the 2-family in the,
Yeah. Well, let's not fall down that rabbit hole now because I just want, when I see 2-family dwelling, I think of duplex.
yeah.
I don't necessarily think of a top and bottom. I think of the side by side. I'm not sure if that's germane to this conversation at all, but that's one of the considerations.
Well, that flexibility is useful because it can help manage with unusual parcels or lots that might have, we don't know what the conditions are on the ground. I think that having side by side or up down is helpful as options, depending on the conditions. Yep.
in my estimation, either one of them is a 2-family. It just, if it holds 2 families, then, now there's another component to this. We do have an accessory dwelling unit section of our bylaws as well, which is another thing. But that also requires a ZBA approval and it's got a lot of twists and turns to it. And we haven't had an application for it. that I'm aware of. There's been some discussion, but nobody's really turned an application in. So we're trying to overcome that step, I guess, by simplifying things. So it would be up to the board to think about this, and for the future, whether they would think that we should move that to a special permit by the planning board, or we should just go right to a P.
Or honestly, leave it the way it is.
I'll leave it the way it is. That's the third option.
We don't want to make it we don't want to make it an end. Basically, is what we're saying. Is what the hope is. That is either special permit planning board, special permit zoning board of appeals, or a permitted use.
Right, and there's another trick to it. So the other towns, I believe I'm correct without Danny being here, so I'm gonna speculate. I don't believe we have a regulation for what a two-family house should look like right now. Part of the form-based code gave us graphic images of what we thought might be best to fit in the form-based code districts. Other towns do have some language that basically says, it may have to look like a single-family home. It may have to fit in a certain way. So I think the fourth option, Jeff, is what I'm getting at, is that we work with the ZBA to develop some kind of regulation that says, here's what we think the two families would work as. That's
Yeah, and if anybody has a few minutes, drive down Samantha. Those are predominantly two-family. There's center entry, single entry homes. You wouldn't know they weren't two-family unless you realize they have driveways on both sides of them.
Right. I mean, we have great examples all over Devon's. All the stuff in Emerson Green is just phenomenal.
Yep.
They have 3s and 2s that just look like singles. So there's some apprehension, I think, as to, I want to say, how the things fit into a neighborhood. There's objective thoughts here that I think it would be better if they were tied into a more substantial regulation that gives everybody an idea of what we expect. Instead of just leaving it open, that anyone can build whatever they want. So that's the first point we want to, I guess, think about. Is that fine with you, Mr. Chairman?
It is, and I just want to add that I'm sure this may not be said, need to be said, but I just want to have for absolute clarity. The planning board is not unilaterally making any changes, or even thinking about unilaterally making changes. This is part of our portion of the discussion in a larger town discussion. So anyone who's watching or listening to this, it's not about the planning board's going to change things. No, we can't. We won't and we can't. But what we can do is propose changes that become part of a town-wide discussion, and then, if there's enough momentum, a warrant on the town meeting, and that's the place of where real change happens. I just want to clarify our role here. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, that's important. So tonight, this is simply an open meeting with a discussion. If and when the planning board comes to a conclusion that they want to change any of the table of use, there'll have to be a published hearing. There'll obviously be a 2-week notice, two times in the newspaper, whatever the process is for a hearing, that will be open to the public and open to everybody to comment. And then we'll get, of course, more comments from town departments and things like that. So that's just a little form.
And then if it's accepted, it'll go to the article on the warrant for the upcoming town meeting, and it will be presented as a warrant article at town meeting with the same information for the people at the town meeting. So there are lots of steps to go through.
Right, exactly.
I do think it is productive, though, for us, and also for complete transparency and honesty, is that we go over these, we actually talk about the pros and cons.
Yep,
and be honest about what they are.
We have to.
I mean, I'll just, for example, let's just take two-family dwelling in A1, A2. Well, the pros are we could get more housing on the same size lot. So it's increased housing and possibly greater affordability. The potential con is, well, it could change the character of a neighborhood. It could look different. It'll be different. And so what we're doing is weighing out, well, what are these? What are the gains that we want to have? What are the cons that we're willing to live with? They're acceptable to us. So that's why it is a kind of a delicate kind of balancing act.
Yeah, and I think that. Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Guys, I'm so sorry I can't be in the room with you. Just the healing has to happen slowly at home. I'm sorry for my injury, my accident, but as you know, I'm really engaged in this. There's 2 other things that I'd like to add to the discussion.
Please.
Adding dwellings adds cost, perception, school, public safety, things like that, and adding dwellings adds to our tax base. So instead of having one $600,000 building on the property, we might have 2 $350,000 buildings on the property, And on the same square footage, the same amount of frontage on the road, the same amount of road support costs, we end up with more tax base.
Exactly.
Which helps us to, and I know I beat this drum a bunch of times, but I'll say it again. The projects that are currently coming to fruition here in this town, less than 2 miles of road, 90 units.
Exactly.
As opposed to a acre zoned parcel that has 127 units on it, close to 5 miles of road. One's going to be more affordable long term.
Right.
Thank you.
So that two-family dwelling category is one we as a board have to think about. I don't know if anyone else has any comments tonight or not about it, but,
I'll say one.
excuse me?
I'll say one comment.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. On the two-family, we are considering special permit zoning, special permit zoning board, special permit planning board, or permitted. I think we made a case here tonight that permitted is probably not a wise decision.
Why do you think that? I'm just curious. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just curious.
Because, as we discussed,
Yeah.
if you want to, because initially we are only changing the table of use, we're not going to change regulations. Will take some time to catch up to the table of use, and so there will be opportunity to, if it were permitted, you could go. Permitted means you can go straight to the building commissioner with your application, and it's by right allowed. If the town would prefer that there are hearings and a debate about the use of a property, then the special permit is the forum for that. So I think it's a wise choice to temper how quickly we adopt new uses.
Yeah, well said. Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else I got a comment for that too.
Yeah, go for it.
So I, have been attending some meetings of other boards, and it's a thoughtful process that it has to go through here. And that's the reason I came up with the thought of the regulations. And what seems to be an issue all the time is the so-called word character. Does the proposed, construction fit the character of the neighborhood? And we do have that actually as a requirement in our, so we do have in our regulations, not our regulations, excuse me, in the zoning bylaws, the requirement for what is you need to do to get a special permit. There might be 6 or 7 categories there. And if the steps are followed by an applicant, in all probability, they have a pretty good chance of getting that special permit, with one exception. The personal choice of someone on a board about the character and whether they think it will fit. So I firmly believe, I'm on the same page as you. The reason that I like the special permit process, whether it be for the planning board or the zoning board, is it requires abutter notification. So that's a protection that I'm not sure that I want to get rid of.
Exactly.
So the abutter notification is a part of the process that at least gives the neighborhood a chance to step up and talk about the situation. The dimensions in our zoning are about what you see in other towns. In other words, if you go to A2, we allow, although our base zoning is 12,000, you need 24,000 for a two-family. So you basically double the size of the lot. So there's been some thought, obviously, in the past, but way before us, to come up with this formula. And it's not unusual. You see it in other towns, kind of the same thing. There's a bigger requirement to add units to the site. So I'm in the same kind of thought as Jonathan. I want to step carefully through this process and think about, maybe we're close right now. Maybe we just need to tweak some other, get maybe some photographs of what we think would work, take pictures of houses around town that we know fit, and say, yeah, you want to do something like this?
Well, yes, and character can be a little weird.
It's very
because, for instance,
personal.
if you look at the class of use and you move down to 1.4, conversion of an existing single-family dwelling to a 3 or 4 family dwelling, provided that, et cetera, et cetera. Now we're talking about single-family to 3 or 4 family. Now, if you look across here, it's like no, 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 and then there's a couple specials. Well, the reality, for instance, on Washington Street, where I live, is that there are plenty of single-family homes that have been converted to 2, 3, 4, or more
Right.
units. They already exist. They're already part of the character of the town.
Right.
It just what, so that whole character thing is rather nebulous. It's
Very
complicated.
Very complicated.
Yes.
So, yeah, it is what it is.
If
Okay.
I may, Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I think in chatting about this with somebody,
Oh, Pauline, okay.
the table of use is a very important tool, but there are a lot of qualifications for each one of these intersections
Yes.
of row and column. And, you know, the person said the other day, we are basically going to let everybody do multis everywhere in town. And the answer to the question is no. They still have to abide by the rest of the zoning bylaw.
Exactly.
Right.
So again, this is not, you know, and I'm not arguing with you, Nathan, about this. I'm just saying that, say we went to P, they still have to abide by all the underlying zoning that exists. And you
Correct.
may be in a situation where some of that has to be looked at. But, you know, I live on a 40,000 square foot lot. I'm not going to immediately tear down my house and put a 2-family in here
Right.
just because I can.
Right.
So, yeah, that was a concern someone said to me. Well, there goes the character of the town, but this is just the entry point for our zoning bylaws for many people. So,
Thank you, Jeff. I want to acknowledge Pauline.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am happy to hear your discussion tonight because I know of a couple of developers who have made plans for duplexes on plots that are within the zone, so you were discussing. But I believe all of you are aware Habitat recently negotiated the acquisition of a blank, empty plot on Newton Street and is planning to build 2 more homes there. And I think they have a right to, but because of the form-based code, there are issues with the number of windows they must have, which is before the ZBA. And I'll just leave it at that. But I'm encouraged that you all are discussing this because there have been some, in my view, mischaracterizations of what the bylaws actually intended. So thank you, Ken, for searching through all this and bringing it forward. And I hope the public will pay attention. I know I'm the only one on here, but I'm going to share the meeting video once it's on website, because this is an important discussion. People can't afford a single-family home sometimes in Ayer, and we need to be more open-minded. So I appreciate that you all are doing this.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Pauline. And yes, I mean, I have an adult child living with me because they're suffering from the housing crisis. They can't find a place to live. And in order to save money for down payment, they can't be paying $1,800 to $2,200 a month for rent, et cetera. So this is a real urgent issue. And thank you. I hope that this is part of a much larger community-wide discussion.
Yep. That's good.
Did you have, Ken, what about, and Ken, Nathan, everybody, what about the townhouses or multifamilies, the 1.3, which is currently 2 no's and then a special permit through the ZBA for the general business? Do you have any thoughts on that? Are they similar to the thoughts you had about the 2-family, or are they a bit different?
Well, in response, it's a bit different.
Okay.
So the connection here between multifamily and townhouse and multifamily, we basically treat them the same, is that this is where we have an opportunity to get the affordable housing units, the large A units, the deeded units. And again, we haven't had any applications that have got those in, although we've had this opportunity in the inclusionary housing. Part of the reason I think that is because we have not allowed them in these 2 districts. So when you go back in time to the zoning bylaws, and I've got some old zoning bylaws here from 2001 or before, you'll notice that we have a cluster zone in town. It was passed in 1999, cluster zoning. And we ran into a situation in our efforts on the open space residential. So we changed the cluster in a previous administration to open space residential. The cluster existed, and the language was there. The difference was that in the cluster, all housing types were allowed. We do the same language in ours, but we have a small sentence in there that basically says right here, the permitted housing types, an OSA involving two and multifamily dwellings shall include a site plan that shows the location, layout, height, above. But the language, before that, provided that the applicable special permit or site plan review requirements for the land use district. So that word, land use district, drives you back to the table. And that's
Yes,
a
right,
mistake
yeah.
that could have been made unknowingly when we went from cluster to the open space residential form of housing. So this has been checked by town council, and the fact that it has that word in there, it limits to what's in the table. So we have an option. We can go in and ask the town meeting to take out the words requirements of the land use district and just leave in the fact that it says units may be developed as single, two, or multifamily dwellings. And then the rest is where the requirements for the land use district. So that's one option. Or the other option is to put it in here like it says with a special permit, applicable special permit or site plan review by the planning board. So my idea was to take it from the
Yep.
N to the special permit planning board in these three instances across
All three
that
of them.
line. So it overcomes that little language in there that says requirements for the land use district and gets it back to where the cluster was from 1999. So under that cluster, we had things built like Autumn Ridge up, by the hospital, and some other, there was a 40B on the other side of town that doesn't really count because it overcomes zoning. But that's, I think, was somewhat of an oversight. So it still provides the same kind of protection, the land use protection, in the dimensional requirements and the 50% give back on the land.
Right.
Gives us all of that stuff, but it just says, you can put it in these districts if you comply with pretty much everything else. That potentially gives us the benefit of getting a fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, whatever number of units that can be designated under the inclusionary as affordable.
Yeah.
So that's the concept behind those three lines right there, across that line.
Now, A1, A2, and
And
general
general
business,
business, right.
GB, yes.
So then you fall into the rest of whatever the other requirements are in that zoning district, dimensionally, and the number of units, the calculation, everything that goes along with it. So you can't just walk in there and put 10 units in. It's got to fit with the land use and the, calculation for how many units can fit on the land and everything else. Traffic, the whole works. But it just takes away that negative. So potentially someone could have come along, and build potentially a multifamily, or maybe, we had the situation come up at Stratton Hill. We asked them, we can't even offer them the fact
Right.
to negotiate, to put in some more multis because
Exactly.
it wasn't allowed in A1.
Right.
So we didn't even have the option. Just gives everybody, the planning board, more options. And that's kind of the concept. So comments?
It gives the community through the planning board more options.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry.
And I appreciate what you're saying, Ken, and I really do, but again, we do this on behalf of the community,
Yes.
and I just want to, because, thank you.
All right, thank you. We have another citizen who would like to say, so typically what you do is you come up, you say your name and your address.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Cashel. I live at 4 Mountain View Avenue.
Welcome.
Thank you. This is more of a background question, but I was hoping you could explain a little bit about, so you have these categories. I get the impression that N is the most restrictive, P is the most permissive.
Right.
I don't know how to intuit SPZ versus SPB, the zoning board versus the planning board. Do you have any intuition on that? And
Yeah.
then, is there a scenario that an SPZ flips to an SPB or vice versa? And when would that make sense? If you don't mind providing that background.
Sure, I'll take it. So I'll take the first point. So P means it's permitted by right.
Right.
N means nope, not happening. Now there's SP, special permit, means you can do this, but first you have to get approval from, if it's B, it means the planning board, or if it's Z, the zoning board of appeals. So that's what it means. It means it's not an absolute no. It means, you have to go through this other step, through the special permit, and what that does is gives the town greater control. That's why that exists. The second question.
But is there a level of permissivity, or you talked about the notification, like, is one of those deemed to be harder, more of a challenge? Like, when you think about, okay, if something is allowed or not allowed, is SPZ, does that require more of a hurdle for someone who wants to do something than an SPB? Do you get the question?
Oh, you mean between those two, not just?
Specifically just
I
between
don't know.
the
Is it
special
more, is one more
permits.
difficult than the other? I don't know.
Not according to the regulations.
Yeah.
We
No,
have
okay.
we have a section in here. Now, to answer the question, different towns have different applications. Some towns may use more of this to the planning board, others may use it more to the zoning board.
Okay,
Since we've all been around for X amount of years, but even if we go back, like to the old zoning, these tables seem to exist that way. So there's been a history of the zoning board being in those locations and taking a look at these projects that way. But the zoning bylaws, which we all work by, meaning the zoning people work, zoning board of appeals works for it, plus the planning board, plus the Charlie, the commissioner and so forth. It has a section under special permits.
right.
So that section basically delineates what we should all be looking at for criteria of approval or disapproval. And if the special permit, but the important thing, the very important part of this, I believe, in the special conditions, is the word conditions itself.
Right.
Special permit, excuse me. There's a paragraph in here for conditions, which allows the zoning board or the planning board to condition the approval. So that's just a step, that's the additional steps. So it then gives the planning board, similar to what we do when we ask applicants to add landscaping for screening, or we ask them to relocate the driveway off this busy street and put it off to the side street. So there's some level of oversight that allows the board another step to look at the project. And I have to be careful here. I will just say that it's important for the boards to look at the application requirements and approvals and then condition it or not condition it on a specific use so that they can clarify that we have made an effort in that neighborhood to, tie it into the housing, to the location in the neighborhood, the street, put a sidewalk in. Do something, that there could be some condition that we add. So that's what makes it different than a permitted use.
Oh, I fully understand that. I'm just asking, like, if you have an N and you're saying, okay, I don't want to make it a P, I want to make it a special permit. How do you decide whether it should be the zoning board special permit versus the planning board special permit?
That's a good question. I think we'd have to, no matter what we do here, is going to go by town council.
I think it was rock, paper, scissors.
Okay, well, no, I'm just really,
that's an
the answer
excellent-
could
the
be
answer
load
is, as far as I know, is-
balancing, it could be anything.
It feels awfully, it feels arbitrary, doesn't it?
Okay, yeah,
It
like you
does.
look across
Well,
a
there-
row and you see
Yes.
different.
It does feel a bit arbitrary, and that's one of the reasons we're having the conversation, is because we're saying, well, what actually makes sense of some kind? But you're right.
Okay,
I'm with you there.
There's,
so then I guess that, would
there's
you
one
ever?
very, let me go, Jeff, and then I'll let you.
Yes, please.
There's one very low thought here that may not carry much weight. But there is a possibility that the planning board typically works on more residential projects throughout the town and sees more residential uses than
Okay.
the zoning board, where the zoning board typically sees variances, an exception to the zoning that they have to vote on.
Right.
We as a planning board typically look at more types of residential projects. So there's some tiny logic, and it may not be valid, that the planning board may be more familiar with residential uses, and maybe that would be a better application for a special permit from the planning board. That's my own personal opinion. It carries no weight as far as the legal side of it.
I see.
But there is some thought to that, potentially.
So that would be an instance where you might decide to actually flip the SPZ to SPB.
Possibly.
It's kind of balancing this commercial
Possibly.
versus residential.
And also be
load.
aware, the planning board meets twice a month, the ZBA meets once a month. So
Got it.
that can be a consideration as well.
That makes sense. Thank you. That was really
Of course,
helpful.
Kathleen, thank you. I think the last one that we haven't talked about yet is about in the downtown Ayer, a form-based code district, dwelling unit at grade, which is currently special permit by us, the planning board. Did you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, let me give you the,
Oh, what's this?
You got the red line one, right?
I don't have the markups, no.
Okay, so the only difference between this sheet of paper that I just passed out and what we had before is there's discussion, we do not have, under 1.6, we do not have a definition in our bylaws for an apartment. We call them dwelling units.
Oh, I see.
So that's just a simple clarification to change
Oh, I
that
see.
word. So we're going to try to scratch out the word apartment and replace it with the word dwelling units, which is defined and we talk about in the definitions.
Right, so that has a clear definition in the bylaws. That makes it
Right.
a lot easier.
Right,
Okay.
so,
Yeah, and if I may, an apartment suggests for rent.
right, does,
When a dwelling unit can be anything for rent or for ownership.
exactly, yep. So it's a better term, and we don't see any, the next one, so that's 1.6. And then, as Julie was kind enough to underline, 1.7, this came up as a result of a discussion about the fire station,
Oh, yeah.
where we have a language in here with the word unit. So that project was limited to one dwelling unit on the first floor unless they went to the zoning board of appeals to ask for an additional unit, which they initially tried to do, and it was going to be an affordable unit. But it was difficult. So
Yes.
Clarify.
to clarify,
This
whether the word unit meant units in the bylaw or you just the word unit or units. So the heck with it.
Yeah, but
If we
this,
change it to the word units, there's no misunderstanding. It could be one or two or whatever works on the lot and so forth. So that was, again, a little bit of a
And
clarification.
I think the root cause of the problem is that the way it's written, it's not clear if it means a or the.
Yeah,
The way it's a grammar issue that became a legal issue.
Yep.
So does it mean a dwelling unit, which could be, mean there's plural units, or does it mean the dwelling unit, which means singular?
Right. So
So I think the simple answer is, as Ken was saying, is maybe we just change unit to units, and then it's solved instantly.
and again, this is with input from the building inspector.
Right.
The town council, obviously. But the same word applies further down. I didn't have Julie underline it, but the word unit comes again further in,
Unit,
or wherever the word unit is. That basically you change them all,
Either a /s on it, so it's singular or plural, or the words dwelling unit or units.
Right.
The two
Exactly.
words or units added, exactly.
So,
Can I ask a clarifying question?
yes,
Please
absolutely.
do.
So why are we continuing to edit the word unit when in all the other previous examples, we were just using the word dwelling?
Because a dwelling is different than, so a single-family dwelling and a two-family dwelling are defined as such, but a dwelling unit is defined differently, I think,
Okay.
than a single-family
If I
dwelling.
may,
Yeah,
we're talking about units that have more than two
right.
dwelling units in them, or a project that have more than two. It's inferred in 1.7, in 1.6.
Right, so we have a definition that says two-family dwelling in the definitions. We also have a thing that says dwelling unit, which is a single unit providing complete independent living, so on and so forth. So because it's, I don't want to use the apartment, but because it's a unit on its own that you can live in, it could be, it's not a single-family standalone on a lot. It's a unit within another building. I guess that's kind of the difference, So it's basically telling us that here. It's in a commercial building typically. That's kind of it.
Ken.
Excuse me?
I just want to clarify one thing you said earlier.
Yep.
When you said, just for the
Oh, I'm
public
sorry, I meant to, get back.
who's not familiar with some of the history we've gone through here.
Yeah.
When you talked about the fire station,
Yeah.
this is the old fire station
Yeah,
on
the old fire
Washington Street.
Thank you, yes.
The Washington Street Fire Station.
Yes, that's what we
Washington
meant.
Street Fire Station, my mistake.
An
Thank you very much.
applicant came to us to redevelop that into a combination of commercial
Yeah.
space and dwelling units, plural. And the issue that we ran into is, according to 1.7, dwelling unit singular at grade disallowed the applicant from putting two,
Yep.
in this case apartments, on the first floor of the reconstruction of the Washington Street Fire Station.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. That was-
If I may, Mr. Chair, it's easy to talk about this table in one conversation, but I think we forget, or we're so comfortable with it, that a project comes to us based on a single intersection between a row and a column.
Right.
This represents everything that we offer, or that's offerable in Ayer currently under our zoning bylaw. But, you know, you're not gonna come to us and talk about 1.2, 1.7 at the same time.
No.
They're mutually exclusive in the
Yes.
conversation. So, it's, and I'm sorry to be pedantic about that. And if I may, the Kathleen's question about SPZ versus SPV,
Yes.
it's kind of like checks and balances of zoning, to be honest with you. And that pendulum has been going back and forth for many, many years in Massachusetts and other places.
Ken, did you want to say anything about 1.7 under the form-based, downtown area form-based code? Currently, it's special permit by the board.
Right.
Any thoughts?
So this seems to be a discrepancy that I have talked to Town Hall about, meaning economic development. So if you look at the two columns headed up by the downtown area form-based code and then the West Air Village form-based code, there's a discrepancy between the two. So it appears that the discrepancy is that the downtown area, it's a special permit by the planning board, and it should be a P.
It should be a P.
So it's just, I think that's I'm not sure exactly how that ended up there, because when we did the downtown, we really didn't do anything thought process-wise much different on West Air Village when we were doing the density and things like that, so. That's just an idea to make the two the same.
All right.
So it shouldn't be harder to do this in the downtown, is what I'm getting at, than in West Air Village.
So Ken, since while you're here, could you tell us and the public a little more about what's going to happen, what the next steps are, what the process is? I mean, you mentioned that working group. Can you give us just a rough, so the whole public understands what's going to happen with this?
Yeah, so the way I understand it from Janet Probadakis, who's chairman of the working group, is that during the month of February, she'll contact the planning board and she'll contact the Board of Selectmen. I'm not sure if she's going to contact the Zoning Board of Appeals or not, and set up a meeting to come to these boards, giving a summary of what their conclusions are. Those conclusions will then be obviously taken under advisement by the planning board and hopefully turned into the changes that we either do or do not do. But it's been a lot of work put in and a lot of thought, by people about what's going on here. So the end result will ultimately end up with the planning board in a hearing, and then if we decide to go to town meeting. But I expect that to be within the next 30 days.
And just explain, so what we're engaged in now is called a public meeting, and it's subject to open meeting laws, but a public hearing is even more stringent because that requires notifications with butters and some other legal things. So it's a much higher standard, and a public hearing is really the place where there's active input from the citizens of Ayer. That's the real deal, and there will be a public hearing at any suggested change.
Right. And when we get to the public hearing stage, that'll be the stage clearly when we'll be making motions and
Exactly.
voting, which we're
Right.
not doing. This is preliminary.
This is discussion.
But I thought the important thing tonight was just to get this started, because it's going to be on a time frame to get to town meeting, so.
Outstanding.
Excuse me, I appreciate this, Ken, and I want to say thank you to you and Janet and Charlie and the rest of the crew who have been working diligently on this. I think it's an important thing that we touch on. And if I may go back to Kathleen's question about SPV versus SPZ,
Yeah.
that's a triggering mechanism so that when a use comes forward that needs a special permit by either the planning board or the zoning board, again, it's an allowed permit. It says permitted use, but it needs to go to a hearing.
Yes.
That hearing triggers
Yep,
a butter notification.
right.
So if there's a P in the intersection, you can do it by right. Just go to the building department, do what you want. It's where it's slightly different than what's in that area. The SP actually is a triggering mechanism that creates a public hearing either before the zoning board of appeals or the planning board, where the abutters are actually notified and invited to come to the hearing. And in the last couple of cases for the zoning board of appeals, no abutters showed up.
Okay, good.
I did want to clarify one more thing, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair. So there have been a number of two families built in the town of Ayer in
Yes.
the last 4 or 5 years. And for clarification, it's very interesting how this happened without going to any board. Well, the OSRDs did come to us. So we negotiated with the Aho Development Company on Shaker Mill Road that they would include 6 duplexes and I think it's 18 of the others, maybe for a total of 24, it might be 22, in an event that they were giving us the more than 50% land. So when it comes to an open space residential development, this is a little very tricky for the public to understand. The planning board does have special permit authority over the housing type for two-family. If it's allowed in the zone, we can, and we've done that, and we've issued those permits, special permits, with the help of the planner who writes up the findings. So we vote on each finding at our meetings, and we determine that it complies with the requirements. In addition to that, other two families have been built in town, which exist, strangely enough, on Shaker Road, across from the Madigan Trekking Company.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, those are beautiful.
Because that side of the entire street on both sides was general business.
Oh,
So even though there was a residential home sitting on the
Yeah.
west side of the road, that district was general business. So they were entitled to build two families under the P that we have in this table.
great.
So it's kind of a strange twist that we've had quite a few, I don't know, could be 12 or 15 two families built in the last few years. And the same thing happened on the street right off the Rotary that leads down to the Pulpit Rock Bridge. I forget the name of the street now, fortunately. There's two large two families there that went in. That general business district extended beyond the Rotary and looped around to that street. So I'm making a case that two families have been built and they look really good and they fit in. So that's all.
Okay, great.
Thank you. And to clarify that we have given out some special permits for those.
Okay. Before we close out the meeting, I just want to give everyone who has a comment or question an opportunity to speak up. I'll start with the board members. Yep, Nathan, do you have something?
I think it just underscore the purpose, right? To go back to the forest view here, that we are looking to create opportunities for housing, to increase housing, increase the variety of housing on existing lots that have certain use criteria, such as the frontage and setback,
Dimensional.
keeping all the dimensional requirements, but now, as was stated earlier, a property that's already serviced with water, sewer,
Exactly.
street, police and fire. There's an opportunity to have two. There's an opportunity potentially to have multis there. Something that will come up when Janet comes to make her presentation, which we didn't cover tonight, is also that the intent and a vision that the dwelling units will decrease in size, so that dwelling units can fit. You can fit 2, 3 more into existing space. I think that's there's a huge housing demand, as we know, with Devon's nearby, also personal experiences.
Absolutely.
And the and Ayer has an infrastructure already in place that is not on the outskirts in where the master plan wants to protect our resources, but we have opportunities to create more variety and frankly, I think to create more value for residents who are here that are on properties that can, if they were to move to a point where they can go through a permitting process, there's opportunities to increase the value of their property and offer additional housing to new residents. So I think
Amen.
I think this is the direction we want to head. for this town. And I look forward to what Janet will present.
Yeah, thank you. How about Jeff and Julie? Okay.
I think we've covered a lot of
Okay.
ground this evening. Thank you for doing it.
Excellent. And then how about Kathleen and Pauline? Any final thoughts or comments you'd like to share with us? Oh, Kathleen's going to come up. Come on up. What you got, Kathleen?
I think this was mentioned earlier was the ADU, the accessory dwelling unit, mother-in-law, mother-daughter, what have you. Where does that fall in this table? Because this one is
Dang,
the
you're
dwelling
just
unit.
filled with good questions this evening.
Might not be in the table, it could just be, could be just in the zoning.
So,
Because this one, I thought, but the 1.7 really speaks to the commercial.
Right. Stand by.
Jeff, by any chance, do you know what the ACUs are under in the, where they fit under the bylaw?
I'll find it, a second. It's on the-
They are. It's a great question, Kathleen. Thank you. They are not in the use table because
That's right.
and we call it accessory use.
Yeah.
In the accessory use is defined by, it can happen in A1 and A2. I don't think it can go into general business, but it was hammered out by the planning board and then it was adjusted at the town meeting. So you can't quote me on it, but it is in our most recent zoning bylaw update. And I don't actually have, believe it or not, I'm downstairs at my office and my book of zoning is upstairs where I was working on it earlier today and I can't go get it.
Section five.
Section
And
5?
you know, Kathleen, I'm on crutches, so I can't quote it on the
Yeah.
But it is not in the use table. The question is, does it deserve to be in the use table?
I don't know.
This use table has gone through 3 iterations since I've been in town
Oh,
for 10 years.
I found it.
Yeah, it's right under.
Yeah, so we're not perfect. We're all volunteers here.
So the way it goes, do you mind?
No, go for it.
So this table that we're looking for, as you see in the heading, is section 5.2. So when you go to the section 5, use regulations,
Okay.
the second section is 5.2, and it tells you there to refer to this table.
Okay.
5.3 is the accessory uses,
Right.
wherein you have the accessory apartment.
I
So
see.
even though it's not in the table, it's got a page and a half of how you apply for and get an accessory apartment.
Is there a distinction between accessory apartment and accessory unit? Are these things interchangeable?
Yeah, interesting. It should be a,
We should clarify that.
yeah.
I think the answer is no, but I'm not 100% certain.
I'm definitely not certain, so.
And it's a question worth asking.
Chair?
Yeah, go for it.
That's a
The
commonly used term.
we use the term accessory use or accessory dwelling unit (ADU). So that's kind of the term of art right now, Kathleen. They used to be called father-in-law, mother-in-law. You know, the kids live here, take care of the parents' units, stuff like that.
We didn't call it father-in-law, but that's very accepting.
Come on, Julie,
Yeah.
throw me under the bus for that.
There is law.
In Belmont, we actually had a huge argument over what they were going to be called. And they were just called units. It was crazy. But yeah, what it comes down to is accessory dwelling unit. ADUs is the term of art that you'll see probably in the Mass Code,
Yeah.
Mass General Law about them. And I think that's what, are they listed as ADUs in our
No,
zoning bylaw?
accessory apartment.
Because that's what I think, Ken, you had mentioned earlier that
Yeah,
nobody had ever applied for that.
But it's very
That
difficult to get.
implies that you need a special permit,
You
right?
do, this,
You have to
for
go
the
to the ZBA again.
Yeah, that's a ZBA. You're exactly right.
Yeah, it's difficult.
And renewed annually.
So I think that is something that should be reviewed.
Well,
It
What-
needs reviewed annually. It can only be a family. It can only be a relative, and it's highly restrictive because it's highly restrictive because there's a great fear of it, and I think in the past, and this predates most of us in the planning board, when Devon's was here,
Exactly.
there were people living everywhere in terrible conditions. You know, and we actually have. If you ever look at our Board of Health, we have interesting sanitary laws in our Board of Health because of it too. Because you don't want dysentery and you don't want,
dysentery.
problems. Not that we don't want people, we just want people to live in safe and livable conditions.
Okay, got it. So to short circuit it, section 5.3 is where I would find out
Right.
where each of these zoning
So
districts.
it's still in the use regulations, it's just not in the use table of regulations. It's in the next section, 5.3. But I wanted to comment on something that Jeff, when the small group was discussing potential changes, the working group, to the residential thoughts, there are definitely all people who want to change accessory apartments and inclusionary zoning. But it seemed to be a large step for us to get there.
Okay.
So we kind of looked at, you agree pretty much, Nathan?
Yeah,
That we figured there might be enough here to work on that we would need to take forward and then look to the fall
Yeah.
for the other sections.
That makes
Right.
perfect sense.
So again, with Danny on board as well, he's already provided us literature from other towns
Correct.
and how their language is used in inclusionary housing and whatnot. But that was the kind of the consensus, that it would be too difficult to tackle those sections right now. Got enough to work on here.
and further, we are article restricted in what we can
That's
present,
exactly.
so.
That was an interesting thing that happened.
So we are picking, from the working group, we're picking the most important things to present for
Exactly.
this spring town
And I
meeting.
totally appreciate that.
And the intent is to continue the working group
Yes.
because there's a lot more that can be dug up throughout the bylaw that we want to
Right.
make recommendation on.
Thank you for the explanation.
You know, I see this exercise as being consistent with so many other things that Ayer has done to be ahead of the curve rather than behind it. We were ahead on PFAS. We were ahead on open space. We're getting ahead on the necessary zoning changes. So I think that's a good sign. Everyone's had a chance. Pauline, how about yourself? Is there anything else do you want to add or question? Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Jonathan. I just want to give all kudos, Jeff and Julie, even on Zoom. I'm so happy to hear you have these discussions, but I am so sad that so many people are not even aware. So I'm going to let you know, I'm going to do my level best to at least make people aware of these potential changes, because the more we can be inclusionary in whatever segment it needs to be, I think Ayer is going to be a better person. We all have felt the influx of single-family homes, but we definitely need to be able to do duplexes, and have some consistency in the bylaws would only lead to that. So I thank you all for that, and I thank Ken especially for
Thank you.
digging through all this. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Pauline. That's it. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Have a good evening, everybody. Thank you, Pauline and Kathleen, for coming.